work for an organization called the Mandela Bay Development Agency. We are a subsidiary company of the local municipality. We are wholly owned by the municipality. We were established in 2003 as an urban regeneration or an urban renewal agency. At the time, really focused and mandated to work on inner city rejuvenation and restoration projects. So we've been around for 20 years, and that mandate has expanded over the last 20 years from inner city urban renewal to, and at that it was very much focused on physical capital projects. That mandate has expanded to outlying areas outlying areas of the city known as townships in South African context. And that was really a political decision that the work doesn't just focus on inner city, which, if you understand our history in terms of spatial separation, those were historically perceived as mostly white areas, whilst the township areas were black and colored township areas. So I've chosen this case study because it focused on the latter. So I think the urban inner city case study would have been more from a conventional urban perspective in terms of the placemaking topic. But I thought dealing with the topic in the context of a South African township perspective would maybe bring a different lens to the discussion. You can move to the next one. So that's where we are. We are based in a coastal city on the southeast coast of South Africa. It was historically called Port Elizabeth. It's now called Gqeberha. And South Africa at the moment is obsessed with name changes. It is really to give acknowledgement to the indigenous places and indigenous people, and to actually address some of the apartheid legacy and issues of colonialism, etc., that people are very, very passionate about. So Port Elizabeth is now known as Gqeberha. So interchangeably, you'd still hear people refer to Port Elizabeth, but it's officially been changed. Our case study area is an area called Helenvale. It's about 10 kilometers northwest from the inner city CBD. That's where our offices are. So that's where this community is located, basically quite central in the urban area of Gqeberha. Next slide, please. So just a bit of a community profile of what we're talking about. Just under 30,000 people, 178 hectares. Density, it looks quite low, but the housing typology is single story. I'll show pictures of that. Persons per household at this stage is 5.8 people per household. There are areas that are very, very dense. A typical household size is about 35 to 40 square meters, very, very small, and those spaces might accommodate family members up to 10 in normally 2-room type of households. Just over 5,000 households in the area. Our unemployment is particularly high in this area. I'll talk about that because it explains a lot. We all know the social ills and all the problems associated with that. Because of the unemployment rate, the household income is very, very low, and a great percentage of households are totally dependent on government grant, and even 28% have no source of income. A shocking statistic, but unfortunately a very, very real reality for this community, is that some 91% of children do not complete high school. So it is a pressure cooker of every potential complication that one can experience, even in a small urban space. And This is the area that the municipality has asked us, listen, this is a critical situation and it's gone from bad to worse. The area, if you can move to the next slide, the area was established in the 1960s and came about as a result of the Group Areas Act and the Slums Act, removing people from the inner city and basically placing them in really substandard housing on the outskirts of the city. So so the housing typology that you see there, the different colors, the blue, the pink, slight yellow, etc. So those housing units were meant to accommodate 2 families. But because of the number of people that needed to be accommodated in the area, those were actually even further subdivided into 4. So you can imagine how tiny those spaces are, and the size of families that they need to accommodate. So as a result of spaces being so limited in terms of housing, you'll often see sort of informal shanty town extensions to the housing. So somebody would build a makeshift structure to add an additional room, etc., for a growing family. But a lot of the life of the place happens in the street. The demographics and the community profile obviously leads to the sort of challenges that I've listed there. I don't need specifically have to go into it, but it has one of the highest crime rates, not in the city, in the country, with murders, robberies, domestic violence, high levels of gangsterism, the levels of education, and then substance abuse. It's also a deeply divided community, so social cohesion is a huge issue. And then the area has been neglected, obviously, during the years of apartheid, and since then, with the basic services and facilities has never been provided to actually service the number of people and the densities that we see in this area. So the municipality has approached us as a development agency to actually go up in there and actually to implement what we call a township regeneration project. So when I started with the project around 2012, I really, as an urban planner, I really struggled to make sense of a clear picture of the identity of the place. We use the sense of the urban terminology about the sense of place and what it is. What does that mean? So in a conventional context, we would all understand that. But in this case, it was like a very, very sterile environment, just beset with every possible problem that you could imagine. And there was a deep sense of pain as a result of the South African legacy. But as we started working in the area and we thought about how do we make sense of this place, and how do you improve things, and how do you create meaningful spaces, and how do you come in there as an interventionist. A couple of years down the line, I really have been humbled on many levels, because a lot of the sense of place is in the invisible and the intangible that gives this area its identity. And we've been challenged because it's not something that us as development practitioners, architects, urban planners, etc., we want to organize things, we want to put them in boxes, we want to, that typical urban zoning mentality. And it was very clear that simply is not going to work. You are going to plan and organize, and then what? And what does the implementation of that look like when you are faced with the dire situation that this community was faced with? We then form a partnership with the German Development Bank, KfW, that gave us a bit of startup funding just to do a lot of analysis and feasibility studies, etc., in terms of what it is that could possibly be done. So early on, you can move to the next slide. Early on, the community themselves, sorry, that's a little bit small, but the headings there. But the community themselves are the ones that advocated. They actually approached the president of the country, invited him to come there and said, we will no longer be ignored. We've been here since 1960s. This is our living conditions. And it wasn't a politician or a business enterprise or an official, anybody. It was the community themselves that mobilized for international interest to see if there can be some assistance, because obviously the municipality would just say, sorry, there's no funds, it's not a priority, etc. We're really a forgotten project area. So together with the German Development Bank, ourselves, we were approached by our city as the implementer, and we agreed on a project called SPUU, Safety and Peace Through Urban Upgrading. Project had 4 components. The one would focus on public space and infrastructure, the other one on safer schools, the other one on youth employment promotion, and then the third leg on domestic violence. So this was obviously in response to the most salient issues and also what the community really wanted to have addressed in whatever projects was to be implemented. So these would be the indicators, and these are really the inputs from the affected community as to what they would like to see. So yeah, we had to go back and forth quite a bit, because so obviously all the technocrats and the urban designers and the social workers, etc., and academia came with all sorts of proposals of what could be done, etc. That was flatly rejected by the community. We had to go back to the drawing board, but the big learning lesson for me is that, as opposed to if you had to look at the terminology of placemaking, trying to make a place something that it's not, or create something adding to. That didn't go down well. The community, strangely enough, although they had very little, was adamant that the place be recognized, the people be recognized in the spaces. So it wasn't a matter of creating a new place, but enhancing what was there already. And those things were not necessarily physical. So that was a challenge to us in the built environment, that we had to rethink our approach to this. So 10 years down the line, so 2013, we started this project. Just onto the next slide, and yeah, those are just list of interventions and so suites of project and program implementations that has been implemented over the years. Some successful, some not so successful. But when I started off, I said this area is notorious for being one of the most dangerous places in the city and also in the country, if statistics are to be believed. So this was a very interesting exercise that we did. We did it with the help of the community. I hope you can see the legend there, but if you can count those white skulls on the area, that's the physical area of Helenvale. That represents different gangs. So 22 gangs in an area with 5,000 households, 1.78 hectares. It's basically street-based gangs. It's block-based, and the turfs are designated drug trading turfs, weapon trading turfs, etc. So just to give you an idea of the context of trying to improve a place when the odds are looking like this, the odds are stacked against you in this particular way. The next slide. So obviously, as a good planner, the first thing you want to do is do a plan of the area, do some, we did a precinct plan, trying to understand the movement patterns, etc. Where are the existing spaces that could be meaningful, that could be improved, that could be enhanced, where new things could be brought in. The area has four schools, one high school and 3 primary schools. So not a lot of, there's no open space. So one of the big challenges is to make do with what is there. And therefore the community felt strong about, we don't need new things, improve that which we have. Let's enhance what we have. So if you think about the previous map, you know, when we say life happens in the street, life happens in the street under those conditions. So I'm not being dramatic or romanticizing the thing, but it's really been a challenging journey in just sort of where we come from an inner city. We always say, you know, we're used to doing these sexy upgrading placemaking projects in the inner city, etc. And here we were tasked with this project that was completely new for us, not something we've done before. But we looked at the physical places, you know, that desire or the tendency of urban practitioners to want to tidy things up and to organize things, you know, and to separate functions, transport routes, education clusters, active and passive recreational space, etc. But yeah, once the plan was done, the plan was beautiful, but we very soon learned that the implementation of these plans was not going to work. It might have worked in a different urban setting, but it wasn't going to work here. I'm trying to move as quickly as I can. It did require a mind shift from ourselves in terms of the practice of placemaking. I have mentioned that engaging with these communities, there were a lot of issues around identity. The legacy of the apartheid couldn't be underplayed, the pain of displacement, etc. All of those things were things that we encountered in every engagement with the community. But yeah, so we had to make sure that whatever we then implement, that, you know, we desist from trying to define everything and to curate everything in the typical way that, you know, places have stories, places have multiple uses, places have multiple meanings and layers of meaning for different people. So whatever we do is that it wasn't going to work if we're going to erode that. We had to find ways of actually enhancing it. So there's always this tension between tidying up and upgrading, etc. In terms of in the South African context, what would be considered aesthetically messy. But we have to remember that there are also ingrained systems and ecosystems of people that live here. When we package them, it's for the residents themselves. It's not for visitors or for tourists, etc. So it requires a different mindset. And I think something that we took a long time to make peace with is being comfortable with informality. This is in the African context. We tend to be very Eurocentric about how we do things historically in the city. That's been the approach. But yeah, so we must remember that the places, when it comes to placemaking, we're talking about different scales. A place and its identity on a neighborhood scale, on a street scale, on a square, on a specific building. I'm going to, in terms of just a few photos, I'm going to flip through and then I'm going to wrap up. I want to just talk about a few focus areas. I mean, there's so much in 20 years that you can say, but um, I want to talk about streets. I want to talk about schools. I want to talk about parks, and I want to talk about spaces. And I want to specifically focus um, about those places in respect of safety, because that has been that's the name, safety and peace through urban upgrading. So the safety and peace is really to have a peaceful place for kids to learn, for families to live, for daily life. It is really considered a war zone. There are times where we as practitioners couldn't go into the area because of crossfire against, competing gangs. Yeah, so the examples we just wanted to show here was like walking to school was a very, very dangerous thing. Kids would get hurt. What we've done is you'll see the kids are still under construction, but the kids are walking on something that we call a music route. It is designated walking routes to the schools that cross through gang turf. And then we have these projects called walking buses where parents actually patrol these spaces and actually walk with the kids to ensure safe transit to school areas. And then we did simple things like just cleaning up, taking out vegetation, and putting lights. In winter, it's often still dark when people move around to schools and places of transport, pickup points, etc. So simple things like lights, etc., has made a huge difference. And we work together with the schools, the partnership with schools. Schools are safe havens in this community. So kids are at school until late in the day, way after school hours, because it is a safe space from the streets and the congestion at home and all the social ills, etc. But that means teachers and social workers and class assistants, etc., have very, very long days because all of this happens in addition to normal teaching. But the schools, in terms of fencing, in terms of sport facilities, etc., that's the type of things that we have invested in. If you remember the slides about the demographics and the profile, to get kids to stay in school is a huge outcome for this program. So in terms of the meaning of school as a place where multiple activities needs to happen, speaks to that problem. Yeah, I think at schools, we also offer counseling access points. In other words, counselors, psychologists, etc., would come in there. I'm trying to show that we would have to do things that, from a planning perspective, we had to go think outside of what we are trained to do, what we would normally do, and get involved in all sorts of things outside of our comfort zones to make these places work. Because it's a very traumatized community, a lot of kids get killed in crossfire. Next slide. Focus on the children has been an issue for us. If you can just a patch of grass that is safe, that is fenced, that is adult supervised, is a godsend to these kids, but it is a huge problem. Kite Boy is a artwork that we have installed in a park area that commemorates all the kids that have died in crossfire. So in Helenvale, the kids make these makeshift kites that they make themselves. So it's a typical symbol of a Helenvale child, but it has a sad story. So the placemaking is not just about beautifying and landscaping, etc. There's a lot of meaning, and the community. Sometimes there's a dissociation with spaces, etc. That's why they vandalize. That's why they're not cared for or etc. But if they start having meaning, then we find people look after them in terms of maintenance, surveillance, safety, etc. So focus on children has been a huge thing. I can basically skip over this one, but this is just an example of a park that we've done. Also, that kids don't play in the street and amongst gang wars, that they actually have safe places to play. And we've actually negotiated with gang bosses that these places be kept outside of their fights. And always adult supervision, etc. The Helenvale Resource Center, it's a facility that we've built, a community facility, but it's a hugely contested space. So it's a meeting place, a gathering place, a place for events, weddings and parties, etc., etc. But it is in the middle, and a lot of people in the middle of the neighborhood, a lot of people feel they don't have access to it because they have to cross rival gang territories. So it might not be you, but it's probably your son or your father or your brother that's associated. So people can't move freely across spaces. It's something that, you know, we built the facility and now the facility is actually underutilized because it didn't speak to the reality of those issues. So this is a learning and maybe a less successful project. Beautiful, but does it actually serve the purpose? The next one. So the other one is we've invested in sport infrastructure. We built a sports field in this area. A bit of context is, and it's not just the Kabeja Port Elizabeth story, is especially during COVID, our public facilities was really destroyed by the scourge of vandalism. Because people were in lockdown, the criminals took advantage of people not being around, buildings were stripped, swimming pools were carried away brick by brick, tile by tile, often sold off for scrap dealers, etc., because people didn't have incomes, etc. So we went and built this facility and people called us crazy. This is in the heart of Helenvale. Sport is very, very important to this community. And so obviously in South Africa, I suppose like everywhere else in the world now, we are sport crazy, but we built this facility, rugby, cricket, and soccer. And it's been there for 3 years now. We have not had one incident of vandalism or theft. The community looks after the place, etc., because it is so meaningful for them. Also, the community was involved in its construction. So in terms of community beneficiation, gives the place meaning. So we don't spend money on security there. They look after it himself. There's a gentleman that lives on the premises. He's got a dog called two Dobermans called Brutus and Frutus that are looking after the place, and nobody would dare. But it's surrounded by gangs and they look after the place. We needed to have some difficult conversation that maybe the law enforcement agencies were not too keen for us to get involved in, but it's made all the difference. So where sport was not being played because there was no safe places to play sport, the Helenvale clubs that have now emerged are now top of their league in terms of in the city. They're one of the best performing clubs. And what happens when there are big derbies or big games is we actually negotiate with the gangs for ceasefire when there are community gatherings, etc., so that people can have safe passage. So this has been an incredibly important space for the community in terms of what it means and in terms of addressing some of the salient issues. Second last slide, next one. So I just wanted to say that in all the partnerships, and we've had various partnerships with government agencies and Department of Education, the schools and business, etc. The biggest partnership was the community themselves. And we have realized that we can't move far. You can move fast if you go alone, but it's an African proverb. You can go far if you go alone. No, you go fast if you go alone, but you go far when you go together. So community involvement, participation from project design to implementation, to monitoring and evaluation, to maintenance, etc. The community was dealt with as a real partner, not a token partner and a tick box exercise of consultation. where they determine the outcomes. That gentleman there has got a Helenvale for Youth Safety and Peace t-shirt on. He was shot about a year ago in the crossfire, but he was one of the youngsters that was a shining star in terms of leading some of the discussions. Yeah, next one. So stakeholders, I just wanted to show the importance of partnerships, and it's not the partnerships with the funding agencies or the organized entities, etc. It is the structures in the community. Yes, we've had a lot of problem. There was a lot of power play, a lot of gatekeeping. But at the end of the day, when you want stewardship and ownership of a space, in the context of safety, you cannot move without of any of these ones. So we had to do a lot of soul searching and putting your pride in your pocket and being able to meet each other halfway. There's a book that we actually workshopped with these people. It was called Collaborating with the Enemy. In other words, being willing to work with people that you don't agree with. As a parting shot, the Helenvale MBDA project, together with GIZ and KFW and the municipality, we actually did a book that's available. I'm not punting the book, but it's from a different perspective. It is capturing the lessons from the development practitioner's perspective, of often being outsiders coming into a space, thinking that you are the specialist, thinking, preconceived notions, etc. And it's a very, very stressful place to work, and what that does. So as a practitioner, you go, I've been there for more than 10 years. You go there with your whole self. It's not something that you detach from. It's not something that you pack away at 5 o'clock when you go home. It stays with you, it lives with you, it affects you. People are dying around you. So it's been probably one of the most challenging experiences in my professional life, but probably one of the most rewarding. So we've actually captured that in a book. So if anybody's available, I can make it, if anybody's interested, I can make it available for free online, no problem. I want to stop there. I've said a mouthful, but yeah, there is so much more I could go into, and I focused on quite a unique story in Port Elizabeth.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Debbie. That is definitely some creative community engagement. And right before we move on back to Ayanda's presentation on the Johannesburg context, I just have one quick question for you, Debbie. How did you define the community members in your project? And can you talk a little bit more about how you negotiate the competing interests between gang members, the youth, families, and community?
Yeah, so at the start of the project, we had an extensive, almost walking the streets, and we've actually asked people, please register your interests. So whether you're a youth group or a school or a creche, a daycare center, and we also people to organize into interest groups. So it was like sports groups, women's groups, youth groups, religious groups, business interests, etc. And it grew over time, and they basically formalized themselves in what we call development forums. And we have agreed that would be the central place of engagement. So we signed what we call a social compact agreement, which is basically a terms of engagement, how we're going to work with each other, so that there is a formal structure, and there is sort of set guidelines, etc. So not an easy process. It took us about a year or two to get just that done. The competing interest was an issue throughout the project, but remember, we did a suite of projects. We did, I think, over 30 projects in there. So it was a case of trying to find a space in the sun for everybody, that there was a wide-ranging things from different types of projects that people could find expression in and participate and benefit in, and that everybody wouldn't be accommodated everywhere. The gangster thing was a little bit more, let's call it subversive, maybe more underground. Getting the gang bosses to actually talk on the side, you know, so nobody wants to be seen in these meetings and participating. But we took a stance very early on not to engage with people as gang members. So we would call a meeting, and you are at that meeting as a parent of a child at a school, or as somebody in the soccer club, or etc. We wouldn't acknowledge your gang status in the official platforms. But there's, especially when we had to organize ceasefires, when things were very bad with, you know, revenge killings and all of those sort of things, that we actually had to be quite brave and go in there and help have community. Remember, gangs are not in isolation of the community. We had to call some of the mothers and sisters and just to say, especially the women, in help us facilitate the discussion with some of the gang leaders to allow us the space to work and allow certain things to happen. So yeah, we had to even get creative in that sense, and yielded beautiful results. If you ask me today if the area is much safer, I probably would say not really. The moment one gang goes down, another one comes up. I suppose it's the nature of the beast. But there is a lot more opportunities for children. There is a lot more scope for growth. There is a lot more opportunities for work and education, etc. So our approach is what we call the you know, pull the bath plug. So you make it more difficult for criminals to operate, and easier for community members that want to do positive. So a bit of both, but we never went in there intentionally to confront or deal with the gangsters directly.
Thank you so much for that, Debbie. Really appreciate that perspective.